You didn't build a great business by being timid. And now it's time to get back to business the same way you built it, with passion. UBS is here with the resources and knowledge you need today. We've weathered the storm with business owners for more than 150 years, and what we've learned can help you right now, not just for your own personal goals, for your business. With insights and strategies to help you get up and running with the focus and determination that made you a success in the first place. It's a matter of asking the right questions and speaking with the right people who can help you find the solutions to move your business forward. With UBS, the possibilities are endless, but the focus is always on you, your family, and your business. Why not benefit from all of the knowledge and resources available to you from UBS? Few people could have built what you built. Proceed with passion.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Shirley Leung, and I'm a columnist with the Boston Globe. We've got a great lineup of panelists to talk about an important issue on how to scale Black-owned businesses and help them reach their full potential. We're shining a spotlight on this issue as we honor Black History Month, but the work to close the racial wealth gap has to be done all year round. We'll be in conversation today with Boston venture capitalist Daniel Achabon, City Seal Coating owner Keith Chaney, and Nicole Obi, the new CEO of the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts. But before we begin our conversation, we're going to hear some opening remarks from our sponsor, UBS. Here is Mel Hightower. Where's Mel? Here's Mel. Hi, Mel.
Hey, Shirley.
So Mel is the managing director who serves as head of the Multicultural Investor Strategic Client segment for UBS Global Wealth Management. So Mel, thank you for your sponsorship and take it away.
Thanks so much, Shirley, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you and your loved ones are staying safe and well. On behalf of UBS Global Wealth Management, I'd like to thank you for joining us today as we celebrate Black History Month, honoring the contributions that have shaped our nation, recognizing Black excellence, and committing ourselves to the continued advancement of the Black community. As Shirley mentioned, I head up the recently launched UBS Multicultural Investors Client segment. The mission of our segment is to champion the future of wealth, meeting the needs of multicultural investors through unparalleled access to the people, ideas, and investment solutions that are serving the changing face of wealth. We're working to expand the multicultural wealth narrative in three key ways. First, we're amplifying multicultural voices in finance and highlighting all of the wealth journeys that exist across our communities. Second, we're helping investors advance diversity, equity, and inclusion through their investment choices. Three, we're ensuring that we walk the walk, evidencing our commitment to inclusion through corporate action and community engagement, such as the fact that we donated our PPP fees that we earned to Carver Bank, which is one of the largest Black-owned banks in the US. Black-owned businesses have long represented the American dream for Black families. Through entrepreneurship, many Black families have leveraged business ownership to build wealth, legacy, and to give back to their communities. Companies that come to mind are Baldwin Richardson Foods, Act One Group, and Adams Communication and Engineering. The companies like these have not only achieved incredible success, but they've also paved a path to prosperity for their employees. The timing of this program could not be more relevant, as it's important to preserve this key pathway to wealth. The pandemic has really laid bare the fragility of our supply chains, as well as upended the labor market. A Federal Reserve study showed that 41% of Black-owned businesses, the largest of any racial group, were forced to close as a result of the pandemic. The historic challenges and barriers to capital for Black-owned businesses contributed to the lack of access to recovery resources. The initial rollout of the Paycheck Protection Program left Black-owned business owners at an early disadvantage since they were half as likely as their white counterpart firms to have relationships with traditional lending institutions. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, PPP loans only reach 20% of eligible small businesses in states with the highest density of Black-owned businesses. The road to recovery for some of these businesses may be long and challenging, which is why it's so important to have this discussion today. I'd like to thank today's esteemed panelists, as well as the Globe, for their continued work and dedication to the city and the Commonwealth and our continued partnership. By bringing in this incredible panel, I'm excited to continue a discussion that's near and dear to my heart, scaling Black-owned businesses and helping Black entrepreneurs thrive. Finally, I invite you to visit UBS's resources for business owners and for multicultural investors. Please visit us at ubs.com, multicultural-investors, to learn more about our segment and how we can help you advance your business and your wealth. Once again, thank you so much for joining us today. Shirley, back to you.
Thank you, Mel, and thank you, UBS, for your continued sponsorship. So I'm very excited about our panel. If the panelists could flip on their cameras. So I'm going to introduce each of them briefly. Daniel Achabong is the co-founder and general partner at Visible Hands. It's a Boston venture capital firm that specializes in funding women and entrepreneurs of color. Previously, he was an entrepreneur in resident at MIT Design X, an associate at Summit Partners, and an analyst at Goldman Sachs. Hi, Daniel. And then we have Keith Chaney, who joins us from, I think, North Andover. He's the owner of City Seal Coating in North Andover. When he bought the company, I think in 2017, he didn't even know what seal coating was, but look at him now. So City Seal Coating is a full service asphalt and pavement maintenance company for commercial and residential properties. Previously, he started a sign company, and before that, he was an executive at State Street. Last but not least is Nicole Obi. She's the CEO of the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts. We know that group as more commonly known as BECMA. And so she previously served as the organization's vice president of member experience and engagement. Nicole has been a serial entrepreneur, co-founding 2 venture-backed startup firms and leading a strategy consulting firm. She's also been an executive at Fidelity Investments. This is quite a distinguished panel, so I welcome all of you to our event today. So thank you, and I'm gonna I just want to go over a little ground rules or housekeeping. So those of you tuning in, some of you have already pre-submitted questions. Thank you, and I'm already working them into our discussion, but we are also taking live questions, so please send them through your Q&A function. The chat has been turned off. First question for the group, let's talk about money. I mean, you can't talk about growing Black-owned businesses without talking about money. And let's start with the banks. What needs to change in terms of how banks approach and evaluate Black entrepreneurs?
I can jump in on that, Shirley. First of all, excited to be here. I'm always excited when I get to learn from other entrepreneurs and other folks that are in the industry and that have made the leap. One of the things that I would say, it's a great question, and just by way of a bit of our experience, as Shirley mentioned, I purchased the business in 2017. We are a seasonal business, so wintertime comes, we shut down for the most part, at least back then we did. And so ramping back up in the springtime, after only been in business for about a year, capital was an issue for us. And we had just received a decent sized contract to line stripe all of Oracle, but we needed funding. And so we went through the normal channels to which we were denied. And we were in this position in which we just needed money in order to buy the paint, pay the people. And so that really could have been a substantial hurdle for us. We went to the community lending programs, which I think a lot of people will know about, articulated our story fully. We put all the paperwork in place. We were still denied. Last chance for us was we had to go out to the market. And that meant that the $25,000 that we requested in order to jumpstart the business, we wound up paying back in 6 months, but we gave him $32,000 back. Through my experiences at the Business Equity Initiative, which is a fabulous program, which if you're on the line, if you haven't heard about them, please find out about BEI. my subject matter expert at the time said to me, Keith, he happened to be not of color. He said, when my wife and I were looking to buy a house, we simply called the bank. The bank drove by, looked at the house. He was an attorney at the time. And within a matter of hours, they said, you have the loan. And I remember saying to him, they didn't check your credit. They didn't do any, real due diligence. He said, no, it was a character-based loan. And to me, I had never heard of anything like this. So to answer your question, Shirley, what happened and how businesses and banks can be better about this, our guardian angel at this particular point was Berkshire Bank. And Berkshire Bank let us articulate our vision. They understood, at least at this point, what it was that we were trying to do. And they provided us with a loan. So to go back to that, I think there needs to be a balance between how typically get to yes, traditional sense, but also a bit of the character-based analysis as well.
Nicole, Beckma, I believe, had a hand in shaping the Berkshire program. Can you talk a little bit about how that came about?
Absolutely. Thank you, Shirley, and thanks for having me, and also thanks to UBS. Beckma did participate in 2020 on that Berkshire Bank Friends and Family program, where our organization, along with others, act as character references, as Keith mentioned, and community advocates, and we're able to refer businesses to the banks and act as characters, references, as we said. That particular program was built around the idea of the use of a specialty CD that the bank and their credit officers and compliance officers were willing to put in place. And it really enabled them to pilot an effective program. And we'd love to see other organizations, financial institutions, roll out a similar program. We have other relationships with banks as members of BECMA, such as JP Chase, that's taken a different tack. They're really, I think my theme for today is there is no silver bullet approach for how to make progress in the work that we all think is important here. JP Chase just opened a branch in Mattapan, and that's their approach for getting to know the community, building relationships, and again, to Keith's point, being able to establish those relationships and get that comfort around extending credit. And then Eastern Bank is also another an example of a bank that has a different way of engaging with the community. So all three different models, but all are doing well in their own way.
Mm-hmm. And Daniel, I was going to say, you launched Visible Hands, and as a VC firm for women and entrepreneurs of color, and you just went through an application process for your first cohort. So, what did you learn about their difficulties in terms of access to capital?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, also to acknowledge, thank you so much, Shirley, Boston Globe and UBS for having us for this conversation. For us, when we were starting Visible Hands, my partners and I went full-time in May of 2020, really right in the heart, in the midst of COVID. And it was a difficult moment because we asked ourselves, should we do this? Right. I had just finished graduate school. My other partner, had just quit his job. And then our third partner, Yasmin, came to us and she said, look, if we don't do this, so many ideas and so many people will suffer. So that for us was such an important catalyst to go and support really talented women and people of color who are building venture-backable technology companies. So to Shirley's point, when we went out to the market, our goal was our initial one was that we can get 500 applicants, right? Because we were like, the talent is out there, but we ended up getting over 900 applicants. So that immediately proved our thesis. And to even emphasize is the people who, we brought into our cohort, we selected 50. We had MIT computer science PhD students, Harvard PhD students. We have small business owners who wanted to use tech to accelerate their businesses. So really trying to identify, how we can support them was such a huge advantage to us, Shirley. And for us, COVID was an accelerator to really push us to get there. I also want to touch upon a point about banking. When we were starting Visible Hands, anytime, especially for an investment firm, there are three things that you really need. The first one is that you need operational capital, you need investment capital, and you need human capital. So we had human capital. We were raising money for our investment capital, and we also needed support for operational capital. And the banks became really catalytic for us. So we had JP Morgan that gave us funding, Bank of America came in, and other really meaningful folks that came in to support us. So the banking support is critical to get this work started.
Mhm. That's a really good point, Daniel. And when I think about visible hands, the other, you were looking at the capital side, but you were also looking at building the network and infrastructure.
Absolutely.
And can you talk a little bit more about that? I mean, what is it like for a Black entrepreneur or someone thinking about starting a business? Is the network, is the infrastructure there right now, and how can it be better?
Yeah. So, when the capitals that, we think about, part of it is the financial capital we talked about. There's also the social capital, having access to the network, right? So if you're an entrepreneur, and some of the challenges that we saw was that, when people were going out to raise money, some of the first questions that they get is, where's your team? Where's your co-founder? Do you have the technical skills? And we see this, that if you are not coming, if you're coming to build a company without that type of access without that network, then how could you really show the VCs that you have the credibility and a team to do that? So for us, we saw that as an opportunity to not only provide money, but really help build that technical, that network support. So we reached out to about 600 plus experts within different categories, from law to tech, to you name it. And that allowed us to create a platform where our founders can leverage and tap into that network. So Shirley, that is such an important point. And the last piece that I will add here is the inspirational capital, to have folks who've done it before, right? Advisors like Nicole and Keats of the world to say, hey, I've seen this, and how can I support you? So that also allowed us to bring on advisors from different, who are seasoned, multiple years of experience to also back us. So we say that we stand on the shoulder of giants.
Nicole or Keith, you want to add anything about the network? I mean, I think BECMA was really launched not that long ago with this idea in mind, right? To really build the infrastructure.
Yes, absolutely. BECMA is very much focused on supporting our Black businesses. We are not a monolith, right? So our businesses really do run the gamut, from micro businesses that make under $100,000 a year, sole proprietors, to very large businesses, and they all have different needs. And BECMA's role is to make sure that we understand what those needs are, and that we help to make those connections. To Daniel's point, whether it's for capital, or to grow their businesses, whether it's operational support to help with the right people, place, or things, if it's technical support around their marketing. So it really depends. We really do want to make sure that we're meeting our Black businesses right where they are and giving support. I will say that the pandemic really exposed quite a bit of some underlying shortfalls and issues that Black businesses in many cases have been faced with. In some cases, it created opportunities. So Daniel's point, we were able to help some of our businesses move off of walk-in cash models onto digital platforms. That was really in reaction to the pandemic. Not only did that allow those businesses that were able to pivot to digital to reopen faster, collect money, be more compliant around the COVID shutdown, it also in many cases started a journey with banking relationships, because now every transaction, that money was going into a bank, which would allow BECMA and our partners to go to those banks, back to the banking question, and say, you have new customers. What are you going to be able to do to make sure that you're providing value to them as customers, and your small business world. So it's been a really interesting journey, but the needs really do vary, and there's not one single way of really thinking about Black businesses.
Mhm.
And I'll add very quickly, Shirley, I don't want to sound eerily familiar to what everybody has already said, because I think they nailed it. But the one thing that I'll emphasize, and Daniel mentioned this, is the social capital piece. That is oftentimes a barrier for growth. So for the entrepreneurs that are on the line, focus on developing relationships, especially those 10x relationships that then start to compound.
Mhm. Mhm. Keith, since you own your seal coating business, I mean, it's grown quite a bit. What did you say, like 500%? So what has been what have you done? Besides getting the character loan from Berkshire, but what do you think you've done that you've been able to grow the business so exponentially?
That's a great question. And I wish I knew, but I think the difference is you have to be successful. You have to be okay with envisioning yourself as being successful. It sounds really ethereal, but you have to get comfortable with that. And you also have to get comfortable with every day getting up and having a good relationship with failure. And what I mean by that is not a matter of if, but when. You know there's going to be times when you fail, but you've got to be able to glean lessons from that. Also, I think we just, there was a lot of potential in the company. So just to go back a bit here, Shirley, purchased the business, and I want to emphasize this for the entrepreneurs or the folks that are thinking about starting a business. There are a couple of paths in which you can take. You can do it organically, as we've talked about, which I think is the obvious, where you start a business and grow it from there. My journey involved acquiring a business. So I purchased a business. So there are programs, there's funding in place to help you, because I didn't know. And as you mentioned it in the outtake, I didn't even know, I hadn't said the word out loud, seal coating, I don't think. But I saw the potential in this particular business to scale the business. I didn't know how to go about purchasing a business. I didn't know how to develop a business plan. All of those things just required me just saying that I've made a decision and this is what I'm going to do. So for you on the line, just make a decision that if this is what you're going to do, it's going to happen. The universe will get out of your way, and you're able to achieve those goals. So yes, we've acquired a business, we've grown it from them, we've developed, as the folks have said, we focus on developing strong relationships. We put a business plan in place. In the beginning, it sounded a little bit cheeky to me to do a business plan, but we followed it, and it's helped us to stay on target. So to answer your question, Shirley, what we did was we were just comfortable with success. We envisioned it always from the beginning. We spoke these things into existence, and we feel very grateful that the vast majority of those things have happened for us.
Yeah, Keith, to jump there, I like the kind of the comparison here that you made of being comfortable with failure, but also being comfortable with success, right? Because the path of an entrepreneur is so up and down and back and forth that you have to be comfortable with both ends and just wake up every day and just execute. So I love the comparison that you made there.
Boss runs every day, brother.
Shirley, I'd like to add that we've been talking about banks and we've been talking about venture, but there are other sources of funding also. And part of what we do at BECMA is to help our organizations just triage and figure out what might be the best. So there are grants, there are CDFIs, there are employee ownership type of options, working with partners like Boston Ujima, or the Foundation for Business Equity. So there are other sources, but yes, VCs and banks are mainstays, and we really do need to make progress in those two areas in particular.
Great. Keith, I don't think I uttered the word seal coating until I got to know you. So that makes two of us. Anyways,
you're welcome.
So when looking at my driveway, I might need a seal coat. Anyways, here's another question that was pre-submitted. This is about contracts, and so minority businesses have been shut out of a lot of Boston city and school related work because the contracts are often too large for a small business. How is that being addressed?
I'll jump in on that one. Just to take a step back, there was a 2020 disparity study done on the city of Boston that found that only 1.2% of the city's $2 billion plus spent was spent with Black and Latino businesses over a 5-year period. So big problem there, right? But BECMA, along with Amplify Latinx and the Lawyers for Civil Rights, we actually sued the city of Boston, a Title VI lawsuit because of that level of spend. And that's still ongoing. But Mayor Wu has taken steps to start to change the tide for the city of Boston around spending. One was to hire my predecessor, Shagun Idowu, and place him as the chief of economic inclusion and opportunity. And he's overseeing programs related to the city's purchasing. She's also launched a small but important pilot around sheltered market contracts. So we're very encouraged by these initial steps, but clearly there's much more that's needed around greater transparency, around goal setting, around accountability, around purchasing with the city of Boston. And all of that applies across the Commonwealth when it comes to municipalities. BECMA right now, we have 4 pillars that we're focused on for closing the racial wealth gap. They are entrepreneurship, ownership, placement, and commerce. And our commerce pillar is about making sure that we are helping entrepreneurs, whether they're business to business or business consumers, as well as our ally members, like municipalities or private companies, to improve on their spend and their inclusion and diversity in how they're spending. So we're doing a pilot right now at BECMA with Brookline, Newton, Somerville, and Malden around making improvements on how they're spending and realizing their goals and desires around greater inclusion. And so we're looking forward to playing that model out. We know that municipalities pretty much buy the same things in a very similar way. And if we have good success and traction here, we would love to roll out this model across the Commonwealth's 300 plus municipalities. So we're very excited about that.
Mm-hmm. And, Keith, I was going to say, you've been very outspoken about not just about the corporate world and issues with supplier diversity there. I mean, it's just not the, actually, I bet if there were a study, I bet the track record of corporate America is probably worse than municipalities, sadly. So Keith, what has been your experience and what do you see in terms of how to move the needle in corporate America?
Well, I think that, so just to be clear, 98% of our growth has been based on the fact that we are not an MBE. I'm sorry, let me just say this differently. We happen to be an MBE. 98% of our growth is based on our position in the market. Our frustration surely comes is that we know we do a really good job and we're positioned to work with cities and towns on a tradesperson contract that specifically addresses the needs of cities and towns. But the narrative is such that, and I want to make sure that I address this part of it, there are some really amazing, capable Brown and Black owned businesses that make sense from a business standpoint for whether you are a corporate partner or whether you reside in the governmental space. It just makes sense to work with some of these businesses because they do such great work. They're also very hungry. And also proportionately, a $10,000 contract would mean more to a small business than it may mean for a larger business. And you've got access to the owner and all host of things. So the narrative needs to be talked about differently. But I also want to, so Jeff Busking has worked a lot. We talk about these great relationships, right? And developing relationships outside of our communities. He had mentioned something that I just resonated with me. He said this would be as effective, this is as effective as the sanctions against Iran, the 1.2% for the city of Boston, right? That if this were a sanction, this would be an amazingly successful sanction. So, it just made sense to me, 1.2%, even though 50% of the city is either brown or Black. So going back to my original point, it makes sense for the city of Boston. It helps to grow generational changes. It helps to create an environment in which you've got these companies that are super hungry, that are well positioned to do the work. So we are cautiously optimistic. But to go back to my original point, just my frustration just comes from the fact that we know that we do a great job. We know where we stand in our industry. We know the reason that we've grown is because of how we service our customers. We've been described as a bit of a disruptive technology because we're super communicative. We make sure that our customers understand and can make great decisions around how to maintain their asphalt. We see it as an investment, and we want to make sure that they leverage our subject matter expertise. So I'm cautiously optimistic that the businesses that reside in and around Boston can be part of the growth.
Mhm. And I guess what you're saying is that the problem is that whether it's government or companies, they just keep going back to the same firms. They give the same without truly reevaluating, right? And seeing, is there a better company? And maybe that better company happens to be owned by someone who's Black and brown, right? I mean,
Yes, right. And there's one last point here, Shirley. It's a bit of a misnomer that it has to be the lowest responsive bid in a governmental space. Obviously, if just basic economy of scales, if I'm purchasing asphalt at X amount of dollars, I will never be able to to get in the market if I'm dealing with a company that is at $40+ million. Just basic economy of scales, the unit price is going to be different, and that goes for asphalt, but also goes insurance, the whole nine. So you do have room to consider things aside from price, the standing in the industry, whether they have a competitive edge in certain regards, in certain parts of the business. So bit of a misnomer. There are ways in which they can get to smaller businesses aside from just pricing.
And I'd like to just add one more thing, that there are established best practices already around this area. Like you said, reducing the size of the bids or breaking the bids apart. Also taking a look at threshold requirements. Oftentimes, some of the requirements are you have to have experience in order to win this bid, but then you can't get the bid because you don't have any experience. Or even looking at things like insurance level requirements. We're not asking buyers to throw caution to the wind and subject themselves to risk, but sometimes the insurance levels really are blanket and they're not applicable to the risk of the particular contract, but they are means of preventing smaller businesses from being able to win a bid. I'll give you one quick example. Working with a DJ who does a 90-minute set for $1,200, and he needed $1 million of liability insurance to operate at that venue. That just, how much damage can a DJ do? It doesn't tick and tie, right? So that's very different than a caterer or another type of provider, a bartender. But just looking at things like that as a start, you may be able to find quick wins for your business and how you can do more inclusive spending as a start.
I love that example. The DJ with I guess one bad song, $1 million liability. My ears are ringing. Anyways, I just want to remind people that you can ask questions live. I see some of them in the Q&A. We're going to get to them. I'm going to ask one last question and then we'll go to Q&A and then we'll go back. I have a couple more questions I want to get through, but of my own. But let's talk about the pandemic and its impact on Black-owned businesses and the impact on aspiring Black entrepreneurs. Mel from UBS gave a great overview about the impact on entrepreneurs of color. Daniel, I was wondering if you could talk about what you've seen. I mean, has it dampened the entrepreneur spirit or in the Black community, or inspired more to chart their own path?
Yeah, I when Mel was giving those numbers, I wrote them down, and it's pretty shocking, right? 41% of Black-owned businesses were forced to close. Just imagine walking in the neighborhood, right, and seeing all those companies, all the small businesses gone. And then she mentioned that 22% of PPP reached Black-owned businesses. So what about the other 80+%? What happened to them? So those are real numbers that when we sit with, it should hit home. And for us, I mentioned earlier that we started Visible Hands in the midst of the pandemic. So part of it was that just seeing that if we don't go out and do it, so many people will not get the opportunities to receive the capital sources of capitals that I mentioned. So there's this interesting, perspective where that it could have dampened the entrepreneurial spirit, but I actually think that it also created it reinvigorated people to be creative, come up with different solutions, and go out and build the companies that they believe will continue to address the new challenges that we're seeing in our economy and in our communities. So I think that there was this different dualities here, but the hope is that the spirit of entrepreneurship did not dwindle.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think there's some stats out there that when you have economic downturn and you have lots of layoffs, that people do jump in, there are more opportunities it is an opportunity. People see it as an opportunity to do something different. And so hopefully we'll see a flourishing of more entrepreneurs jumping in,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we look at the top tech companies, the resources that we're using right now, from Facebook to Google, those technologies really took place. It began to, they were birthed in the midst of the past recession. So, the creativity, I think these recessions and challenges that we go through in an economy also allows room for creativity, but it doesn't dismiss the fact that so many people suffer. And in the context for Black and Brown businesses, that they tend to suffer the most. And then when we compound that with the lack of access to lending, or the hidden biases that goes through lending and support, those are important things to make visible.
I'll add, at BECMA, we really are looking to the future. We know that many of our members, because, as Melinda mentioned, weren't even able to get that capital that they needed, and they closed, and it set them off on a path that they're in a recovery mode. Some of our members actually did well, and we want to help them to grow and go on to what is next. But we know that there are billions of dollars coming into the Massachusetts economy from the infrastructure bill, from the ARPA bill, and we want to be sure that we're ready. That our entrepreneurs are ready, that they have the support and the services that they need, that they have the capital that they need to grow. But we also know that we have to have our allies ready as well. We talked about removing those barriers. We talked about going beyond making statements of support and actually putting that support into action throughout organizations. So now is the time. I'm really excited about this time that we're in right now, but much work needs to be done so that we can take advantage of it and close that racial wealth gap. There was a study that said that if we close the racial wealth gap here in Massachusetts, we would generate $25 billion for the Massachusetts economy in just 5 years. Now's the time.
I want to just add quickly to what Nicole had said. She talked about being ready. That's one of the things that was extremely important for us, that we had to have our back office in place. And I'll speak to the pandemic part of it, but a couple of things. If you, not every business is interested in growing, and that's it is what it is. But if you are interested in growing, you have to have your back office ready for these type of events. Not just the pandemic, but when you start to interface with larger corporations, they'll have extremely competitive or complex procurement systems. Opportunities will arise, and oftentimes they can be missed if you aren't ready. So the rest of it is a bit more granular. We'll go back to the pandemic piece. Interestingly enough, the pandemic was an eye-opening experience for us, because as a business owner, you have these times in which you're working on the business or you're working in the business. And there's no better salesperson for the business, I believe, than the owners in most cases. And so if you are working on the business during the pandemic, a couple of things happened for us. We really needed to understand our customers and their needs prior to the pandemic. So we took a good week or two to reach out to we do a lot of residential driveways, but we also do a large apartment complexes, and then we interface with large corporations and then governmental. Those are our customers, governmental organizations. And we asked them candidly, how do you envision you making your way through the pandemic? And it was very intentional conversations. And what it said to us was that a lot of the larger organizations are going to suspend this activity until post-pandemic. But then what we saw was that our residential customers were interested in doing some more home improvement activities. So we switched our resources and started to market that part of the business. And as a result, we stayed flat. So we were very fortunate. But then the PPP, the paycheck protection piece, right? Because we were ready, because we have a strong back office, we didn't miss a beat on that. But what it opened our eyes to was that there were other grant opportunities out there. It wasn't just this one kind of insular opportunity. What it said to us was that, hey, there's other money for us to get out there to get. And so just to go back to this, just to make sure that there's something that the folks on the line can take away, invest in your back office. The folks here know that a couple of things always have to happen. The phone always has to be answered. We always have to be, in my mind, I feel as though we have to be 10 times better than any other company. That's just what I carry from me. And so just invest, spend time, and understand that if you are in a position that you want to scale your company, you're going to have to focus on your back office. And that can be a barrier if you don't spend the time and effort to do that.
That's a great point. I'm going to go through a lightning round of questions. So I'm going to, in the interest of time, we have about like 15 minutes left. So I'm just going to go round robin here. Nicole, this is a question for you. You had mentioned as an alternative banks, for funding, you had mentioned CDFIs. Can you explain to people what these community development, is it community development financial
institutions? Yes. So they are entities that are created to be similar to but separate from how banks operate, and so there are several of them across the Commonwealth. Lynn Lloyd's group is standing up one now, and I'd be happy to have that person contact us, and we'd be happy to make introductions. But they make loans and like a bank, but their criteria is different than a traditional bank's on how they make decisions on making loans.
Daniel, this is, I think, a good question for you. How do I introduce myself and network in ways that do not come off as me being a quote unquote taker when seeking social capital?
Yeah, I think part of it is just really being genuine with who you are and what you're trying to accomplish. And I think there's the networking aspect of it, but I really see it as building relationships, right? And understanding what, to what Keith was saying about, having a strong back office. I also think about it as just having a strong relationship office, right? Like having people that you can go to and bounce ideas of, because not everybody necessarily is gonna want to be a business partner, but they could be a strong advisor, or they can introduce you to somebody who can help you. So that's why I see it as, don't necessarily see it as networking, but see it as building relationship.
Mm-hmm. Great.
100%. I agree 100%.
Mm-hmm. This is a question, maybe Keith, I don't know if you want to take a stab at it or anyone else, but this is a really good question. And this comes up a lot with, I know, small business owners. Real estate and physical space is very important to scaling and visibility. What are some solutions to bridge the gap and take up space? Because it's very expensive, right? And so how do you deal with that, the real estate issue?
I'll go really quickly. So 100% correct. Nicole, Shirley, you mentioned early on that we were in North Andover, too expensive for us. And hope I'm understanding the question correctly. We moved to Lawrence, Massachusetts. We have twice as much space for half the cost. So for the folks on the line, big advocate of the city of Lawrence. They've been absolutely amazing. Yes, definitely a hurdle, but there are emerging cities that you can find great physical space in that can accommodate your needs.
You're no longer in North Andover? You moved? Or
We've been out of, Well, so our mailing address is in North Andover, but the Secretary of State recognizes us we are physically right now in the city of Lawrence. Love it. Couldn't be happier.
Yeah.
And Shirley, I'll say
Yeah.
that real estate is part of one of our pillars, the ownership pillar. We are currently helping 2 of our members buy the buildings that they've been renting for some time. So this is a really important issue, and we'd be happy to engage with anyone who's looking for opportunities to make purchases. If we can help, BECMA would be happy to do that with our partners, whether it's Mass Development or others.
Can I bring up 2 other ideas? I think Shagun and I talked to Shagun about this, about some municipalities are offering discounted rent, right, to small businesses of color. Like that's another way to diversify your Main Street, right? So
yes.
And also I've heard of people sharing space, like creating their own WeWork, to small businesses of, owners of color. And I was like, oh, that's smart. Anyways, let's see. Okay, here's another question about money. What are some alternatives for early stage financing for business owners that are categorized as undercapitalized by banks who aren't yet willing to lend to them? I thought we answered that question, but maybe Nicole, you could do a quick summary again.
I was going to give that one to Daniel.
Oh, Daniel. Okay, Daniel, you go. Okay, Daniel, your turn.
Absolutely. So I think typically coming from the venture capital world, the assumption is that venture capital tends to be the primary access to funding, but really venture capital tends to, with all the small businesses out there, and a startup is a small business, right? So with all the small businesses out there, about I think less than 1% goes to actually come from venture capital side. And then within the venture capital, when we look at the distributed amount, that's where we also see the disparities of 90% going to men and mostly white men. So just thinking about the global picture, there's the significant pool of money don't actually come from VC. So to some of the things that Nicole mentioned, the CDFIs, the banking platforms, revenue-based loans, there's so many different ways to think about it. But I just wanted to highlight that venture capital is an important piece that could be an accelerant of growth, but there's so many other options as well.
Very quickly, been in business for 4 years, one of our largest company, well-known customer, developed the relationship with him. The relationships are key, can't emphasize it enough. Said to me at one point, he goes, Heath, what are some of your barriers to growth? And I talked about funding, but I also said we want to have smart growth. We want to be consistent with what we've told people who we are. And he said to me, do you need funding? And from a kid who has never heard that before, I mean, do I need funding? That was just a crazy concept. But I just want to circle back on that. There are other ways, non-traditional ways, that as you start to grow, as you open yourself up to relationships, I've met people in spaces that I would have never dreamed of, but it all starts from relationships, and these type of opportunities open up.
And not all businesses are, you have to give up a portion of your ownership. So not all businesses are well suited for VC funding as well. Just that's something to really keep in mind. And don't forget about your existing customers or your new customers. That's also a path to continue to grow your business through your revenues and through partnerships. So those are just very early stage opportunities to grow sort of organically until you reach a point where a bank or another type of institution is ready to make a loan to you. And you should also go in and start having those conversations now. What's it going to take? What do I need to do? What are your requirements?
One quick thing to Nicole, just if you do purchase a business or if you do start your business, that's when you, assuming that your credit is decent, then that's when you want to start to reach out to these institutions to get lines of credit. My situation was it went south, meaning that my credit got damaged as the early stages of our business played out. And I wish I went for access to capital early on when I had great credit.
Yeah, I mean, this question has brought up so many great points because, we even talk the point about credit, we didn't get to talk about that. That's huge in getting access to capital, and also the bias that is embedded within the structures of credit. So really important points that this question brings up.
Mhm. All right, I'm going to have one last question. We have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to see if I can try to squeeze in 2 questions. So how are BECMA and others on the panel partnering with colleges and universities and their students in the Boston area to aid in mitigating the disparities seen with Black and Brown business owners, and the community at large?
I'll go quickly. Listen, I believe very strongly. I'm product of a single parent. Didn't really, I don't think many people expected much. I did, but I don't think many people did. It is my responsibility to make sure that as our business grows and as we start to see some positive impacts to our business, that we reach out. So we work with the city of Lawrence. We bring interns here. We want to make sure that they see, that they understand that representation is important, that they see how a business grows. And so we spend a lot of time volunteering with local organizations to make sure that young people get to see my journey, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's vitally important, and I think it's our responsibility.
Mhm.
And I'll say that for BECMA placement, which is to us about workforce development, it's also about placing Black people in decision-making roles on boards and commissions. But placement when it comes to high school and adults and getting them into the skilled workforce is a priority for BECMA. And we are working on some initiatives that we hope to announce soon towards those ends to make sure that we're helping people get across the finish line, get their degrees, get their certificates, and move into onto a different trajectory for their families. Again, like Keith, from my mother, I was a single mother, went to college when I was in middle school. When she came out, she went from a minimum wage job to being in the middle class, and it changed our lives. And so that is something that we take with us as we work on our placement pillar.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, and for us, with Visible Hands, there are several ways. Part of it is that even in the selection, we have partner relationships with several schools and many organizations to help us get access to incredible talent, folks who want to build companies. The other thing is that we also think about entrepreneurship is not done in a silo, right? Building a company is not done in a silo. So for us, with our entrepreneurs, we're thinking about who are the people that they're hiring. Is it a diverse team? The people that are coming on your board, is that diverse? And also, for us, another thing that is also making sure that we're having skin in the game in these conversations is that our portion of our profits will be going to community organizations. For me, one of those organizations played a huge role in getting access to go to school. I'm a Posse scholar with the Posse Foundation. So I'm as an immigrant, if I didn't have that kind of access, there's no way that I will be here speaking with you all, years down the line. So that is a commitment from our company to ensure that we're supporting folks within that space.
Mhm. And I'm just curious, Nicole, I think the question also is getting at, are universities and colleges, are they under the same pressure as municipalities and corporate America in terms of doing work with brown and Black businesses? I mean, what is your thought on that? Are they doing enough?
There's a lot more that needs to be done, right? Massachusetts has such a great opportunity to elevate our game. And we're not going to be able to realize our potential as an economy until we activate all of the members of our community. And so we do have some academic institutions that are a member of BECMA, MIT, Benjamin Franklin Institute. We're working to have others come on board. And we know what we want to accomplish around working with these institutions to, again, get more Black people into the skilled workforce, into a position to help to make decisions, critical decisions across the Commonwealth. So we're not there yet, but we're looking forward to getting started to do more around that particular opportunity.
Okay, we have 90 seconds left of this panel. And then I got to hand it back to Mel. So, all right, one question. Maybe you could do it in a sentence. I don't know, but I know I know people hate it when I frame it this way. But if there's one thing that has to change in order to see more Black businesses grow and thrive, what would that be?
Yeah, I'll go quickly. I'll say the first thing is money. The capital is really, really important. So in Massachusetts, if $35 billion, what was invested in startups, and only 4%, less than 4%, so 0.4% went to Black founders, that's a problem. So the capital access is huge.
I'll go next. Scaling Black-owned businesses, it's not a nice to have, it's a necessity. And there's actually no one way to do that. BECMA has 4 ways with our 4 pillars around entrepreneurship, commerce, placement, and ownership, enabled by capital data and others. So there's so much that needs to be done, but we just really do need to get started.
And I will end on an inspirational note. Nobody gets to decide your future or your success. Just believe in yourself and continue on the journey.
Great. Well, thank you, Keith. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Daniel. This has been a great conversation. Keith, I want to quote you again. Not to be afraid of failure, but also not to be afraid of success. I love that. Anyways, I'm giving the virtual stage back to Mel Hightower from UBS.
Thanks, Shirley. And once again, I'd like to thank our speakers, Daniel, Nicole, and Keith, for an incredible and insightful discussion regarding Black-owned businesses. I mean, you've covered some impressive strategies and tactics and tips on how to scale your businesses. And I believe we're circulating a list of resources that were mentioned from our wonderful panelists later on this week in our thank you note. In addition to the resources that you'll receive, I want to offer that if you have questions about your personal wealth, your business, and how your financial goals can be accomplished between the two, I encourage you to speak with the UBS financial advisor to access our insights, our knowledge, and our resources. You can visit us at ubs.com/business services to learn more. And with that, I want to give a special recognition to the UBS Business Owners segment led by James Jack and the UBS Greater New England Markets, James Ducey, for their sponsorship of this panel and the series. And finally, once again, Shirley, I'd like to thank you and the Boston Globe for putting on this program and for the great partnership that we've had throughout this entire series. Please be on the lookout for our next program in a few weeks and what's ahead in 2022. Thank you for joining us today. We're very much looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you.